You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 200 of Arsenal Pass. Yes, episode 200, a bit of a milestone. Pankaj, I want to take just 30 seconds, first of all, to just take a moment and say a massive heartfelt thank you to the Flesh and Blood community for supporting Arsenal Pass over these past 4 years, to our Arsenal Pass family, to our friends and our fans. These past almost 4 years have been nothing short of honestly amazing, life-changing, and an experience I hold so dear. I think back to the first time I traveled to the US for a Flesh and Blood event, just after COVID. I went to Florida, and just meeting people for the first time, and I was like, wow, people actually care and listen to us. I'm shocked, first of all, but it's a very humbling experience. I want to give a shout out to Mr. Brendan Patrick for starting Arsenal Pass with me, and to you, Pankaj, as well. Thank you for coming in to start and be one half of this next chapter of Arsenal Pass. In 8 weeks' time, we celebrate 4 years, and we've just been cooking up a bit of a special pod. Well, we've been talking about it. We are going to cook up a special pod to mark the occasion. But anyway, unless there's anything you want to add to that, Pankaj, we can get into this week in Flesh and Blood.
Well, just want to say, obviously, I haven't been here for all 200 of the episodes so far, but I do want to extend my thanks as well to all the fans, the people who listen to us yap and honestly give us the platform and the fulfillment to go ahead and talk our sometimes unhinged thoughts and just appreciate that they listen to it. I also want to congratulate you, Hayden, for coming back and now a married man. So congratulations on getting married.
Got a ring on.
And all that. And yeah. It's got a ring on it. How heavy is that hand? How's it feeling? Are you going to be able to shuffle your cards now?
So I played the calling in the weekend, and it did feel different shuffling cards. It like kind of rubbed against the sleeves because I also shuffle like end to end. This might sound weird. You know, usually you shuffle kind of side to side. I shuffle end to end when I riffle shuffle. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Gonna have to get used to that weight again. But yeah, thank you to all our fans and congratulations to you, Hayden.
Thank you very much. This week in Flesh and Blood, Pankaj, why don't you kick us off? What have you been up to?
I played the Battle Hardened Portland this past weekend. I brought new again. I've got a different cook of new. I've got a small mark package in it, Hunter's Clave, and just a couple of cards to go with the marking stuff. That was mainly for the aggro matchups, particularly Syndra, because I find Spider's Bite into Syndra doesn't really do anything because they don't really want to block their attacks anyway. So I was like, let me get something that can help me race. So it was that. So it's a bit of a new cook on new, and I did feel a bit of the inexperience on this new version of it, particularly one of my losses. So I went 5-2 total, and one of my losses was against a Florian, which I think should be a favorite matchup for me. But I made the wrong call beforehand on which dagger to run. So Spider's Bite is still in the list, and I should have brought that into Florian, but I chose to go for the Clave because I thought if they take turns to set up, I want to punish that by racing them. That ended up being the wrong call, so lost one game to that. My opponent was more experienced than me in the matchup straight up, so lost that one. And then the other loss was in the mirror, where sometimes things in the mirror can just go wrong, you know, where you fall on the back foot, you take a pivot, and the pivot doesn't work. So I took a pivot to play a Siren's Call, and the Siren's Call whiffed because my opponent had all reds, and then I was like, okay, cool. So the pivot I took damage for didn't work, and it just fell further behind, and it was just not great. So that was the other loss. But yeah, overall, pretty happy at how I played. Just wish I had gotten a bit more experience in like the Florian matchup. And I still have a bit more experience to get on this deck for sure, this new version of it. So RTN season, I'll be hopefully racking up those reps. And what about you, Hayden? How's your week?
I was going to say the duality of a Siren's Call is real.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately. This week in Flesh and Blood, I mean, obviously with the wedding, took a couple of weeks off. The last time I kind of touched Flesh and Blood was when I recorded with Nick Butcher. I'd been playing a little bit in preparation, knowing I was going to the call in Christchurch. I spoke about on that pod, having to make a call. Ended up just taking Enigma with me, with the thought that if I want to play anything else, I've got friends there. I can probably find the cards I need to. I flirted aggressively with playing Victor, to be honest. And I actually think it could have been a very real... a very viable option. So could Jarl, which I think we'll talk about. But I played Enigma.
How many Syndras did you
did
you face?
I faced 2. I went 2-0 against them.
Cool.
I'll talk about that.
Wow. Okay, cool.
So I obviously didn't get to test quite as much as I wanted to. I still tested a little bit, and I was speaking to Matt Rogers, who is, of course, also on the PCG Invasion team, and I said, I'm thinking about playing Enigma. I heard you were thinking about playing it as well. Where are you at? He's like, I think I'm on CYB. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, is this just fatigue format? And he's like, I think it might be. So shout out to Matt. I copied his homework, played 79 of the 80 cards that he basically sent me his list. I was like, I want to change 2 cards. And he's like, yeah, I've already basically changed those 2 cards anyway. I was like, okay, cool. Landed on the same list as him. So four of us played that same 80 or 79 of 80 cards. Matt, Nick Butcher as well, myself, and then my friend Dan, who I always test with, ended up just deciding, he was just like, all right, he's like, I want to play Enigma, and it seems like CYB is probably the best. Pretty hard to play normal Enigma at the moment, I think. Unfortunately, I started 5-2 on day 1. I lost to an Aurora in a really close game where, honestly, I think I threw. Unfortunately, I think I just hadn't played against Aurora in a while. Different strategy that I'm used to against Aurora, and I played a little bit badly. And then I had a really close game against Zen. One of the Zens ended up top 8ing. And then day 2 did not start off well for me. I played against the Araknis Slip Through the Cracks deck that kind of did really well at that event. That was played by 3 players, 3 friends, who coincidentally one's also a friend of mine. And lost a game there as well, and then lost to another Aurora when he blew my Phantasmal Footsteps up on turn 2, which was not a good start to the game. Lightning press.
With a lightning press?
Yeah. You just can't play around it, I think. There's the margins are too fine in the way that we were playing that matchup, so it is what it is. But no, I mean, overall, I finished X4. I actually had a draw in the last round, which I wasn't too happy about, honestly, because I felt that had maybe my opponent played a little bit faster, the game should have well been over and I should have won, but it's fine. Like, I had the deterministic loop of just Chi left and they had 3 cards left in deck, but it's fine. It is what it is, right? So I missed cash, actually, with a draw in the last round, but I still had a good time, and considering no prep, I was happy to get out there. Happy to 5-2 day 1. So can't really complain overall.
Also, it seems like your losses were against aggro decks. Like, you lost the games where you were, at least theoretically on paper, unfavored, right? Like the Auroras and the Zen and the Slippy as well. With Slippy, I guess I'm not sure. I think the jury is still out on who's favored in that one.
Yeah.
But on paper, these are all aggressive decks, and you're an Enigma, so they're not the easiest matchups.
Yeah, for sure. Like, my losses, to recap, so 2 Auroras, a Zen, and a Slippy. And I think I'm not sure about the Slippy. Like, I really want to revisit that matchup. I went with a strategy that maybe was the incorrect strategy. I basically sided out my CYBs and tried to play a fair Enigma game into them, not really understanding necessarily what their deck lists look like. And I think that was probably, even if it was the right decision, I don't think I executed that plan correctly. So I'm not sure. There was actually a string game where Nick Butcher went the other way, played the CYBs, and it also didn't go well for him. So I'm not sure what the plan is. And then, yeah, like the Auroras, I do think that matchup is like close. I think because we showed up with a deck that basically just says, well, I'm going to fatigue you and see what you can do about it. Like, my opponent that I lost to in day 2 had Poison the Well in his deck. So I was like, okay, I definitely wasn't expecting that. So yeah, I lost my boots on turn 2, but then I also got Poison the Well for 7 on my last CYB, my yellow CYB, my last CYB. So it's like, I mean, okay, it is what it is. What do you do?
I'm surprised. I'm surprised to hear that. I've kind of thought CYB stonks, to be honest, have been going down. And
Me
so
too.
for that reason, Poison the Well stocks should also be going down. So this person's still playing it. All right. I mean, they got rewarded for it, I guess.
I think he said he like net decked a list from Memphis, and the person had one Poison the Well in the deck. So the Slippies were also playing the Poison the Well, and I knew about that. That's the reason I sided differently. And I played Syndra, and that matchup felt like one of my games was close, but I actually think that matchup is, because of the plan we were on and people not understanding we're just going to fatigue them, was pretty good. Like, the matchup felt pretty straightforward, I think.
Yeah, Redline Syndra doesn't have the deterministic endgame loop that Fi has.
Not at all.
Because Fi has the blues to buy back Flame on your turn and buy it back again on their turn. Syndra, the Redline version, the one that's popular right now, doesn't have that. So I could see them being a little more vulnerable to fatigue, but you do need to. But that does mean the 60 cards are all full gas, and you kind of need to survive that. So
yeah, but once you, I think you can survive it. And also, the difference between Ember Blades and Kunais in the in game is massive. Like, because you can create the 2 shields each turn, trade damage, you're just always deterministically locking those, like Aurora, Syndra. But against Ember Blade and a Phoenix Flame, you are not. So, yeah. unfortunately.
Unpreventable Phoenix Flame too if
Exactly.
they manage to keep the Shuko around.
Yep.
So yeah.
So
All
yeah.
right. With that, Margin, with that, Hayden, oh my god.
I leave for
Margin's-
1 week. I leave for 1 week, and I've been replaced in your head.
With that, Hayden, let's move on to the news. The reason why I misspoke is because the first bullet point in our show notes is a congrats to our winners this past weekend. Congrats to Margin for winning Battle Hardened Portland on Verdance. Congrats to Carlos Carrero for winning Battle Hardened Barcelona on Jarl. And Sean Stanley for winning Calling Christchurch, the one that you were at, on Syndra. So we had 3 winners this past weekend. Honestly, just a lot of events, a lot of coverage to watch this past weekend, Hayden. I'm guessing you weren't able to watch much of it, though?
Oh, no, I've seen...
Oh, wait, no, yeah,
I've
you
seen
were in
basically
it.
nothing
You were
yet.
in this.
I will watch, though. I will watch.
Yeah.
Like, I am trying to get better at just rewatching post-events to learn about almost... What I'm trying to get better at, I would say, in Flesh and Blood is understand the narrative of an event in terms of, like, why did people decide to play these decks? Just trying to educate myself about what are different... You know, you think one way about the game, right? But other people think differently. So, and I could go and talk to people, I guess, and I do some of that, but you can't talk to everyone. So just trying to understand, okay, what happened? How did the event unfold? What was the top 8? What was the kind of conversation, even like the YouTube comments? Like, what was the conversation? What are the commentators talking about? And what that might mean for next weekend's event or the following weekend, especially because Road to National season is underway.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also, I just really love tuning into coverage.
Yeah.
Obviously.
That's
yeah,
it.
so I was at the Battle Hardened Portland, but then afterwards I was just catching up on Calling Christchurch. So we did get some information at the Calling Christchurch coverage. Yep, about the next set, Hayden. So High Seas is the next set with the world premiere happening on May 23rd in Taiwan, Taipei specifically. Do you have any thoughts on that? Did you watch the teaser trailer at least?
Yeah, I did. The funniest thing was, I think they did it on day 2, before the top 8, I think, or like maybe after round 2 or something of day 2, and Kieran McIntyre, who's was doing the coverage, the commentary alongside Carol and a couple of others, walks past me and he goes, "Did you see the announcement?" And I was like, "No," but I was hearing a bit of a buzz through the room, and I was like, "What is this buzz?" And he's like, "Go have a look at the stream." I was like, I'm about to play another round here, like. And then Carol walked past and was like, "All right, what's happening?" He's like, "Next set, High Seas." I was like, "Oh, okay." And then I went and saw it.
Are you a pirate? Are you a pirate fan, Hayden?
I
Does
am.
that theme do much for you?
I'm not. But in the context of Flesh and Blood, I think this could be absolutely sick because we can talk about theories, right? Is there actually going to be a pirate class? Or potentially more likely, is it a spin of, like we've seen, what does that mean for a ranger? What does that mean for an assassin in that kind of world, right? Rather than necessarily new classes. We might get a new class. But I think just the take of putting existing classes into this new world, effectively, or new part of Wraith that honestly we haven't even touched on before, right? When it comes to High Seas, is very exciting. So yeah, I'm keen for it. I know probably DM Armada's shouting from the rooftops right now. He'll be pretty excited.
Yeah, my take is that I don't think pirate's going to be a class. Like, I'm with you. That just doesn't quite make sense to me. But I'm not entirely sure if it'll be a full talent either. So my current take, which is a bit of a hot take potentially, is that I think it's going to be similar to like Royal, where it's not a full talent, but it's just more of a... if you think about pirates, it's really more of a profession, isn't it? It's not a talent or a class. It's just, this is what you do. Like, that could be a pirate wizard. Like, why not? Or a pirate illusionist, God forbid. Pirate, literally anything. So my current take will be, like, similar to, like, Royal, but maybe with a little more impact than, like, what the Royal heroes get for being Royal.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see it being, like, seafarer or something, like, they're not pirates. They're not, and and they're not talented necessarily, but they have the attribute of being seafarers or something. I mean, what classes do you think we're getting? I think the one that's the most popular in terms of thoughts right now is definitely Ranger, given, cards like Quiver of the Abyssal Depths, things like this. There's kind of some precedent of Rangers at sea.
Yeah, the Trench, right? Trench of Sunken Treasures, I think the biggest. Like, it's literally, like, very pirate-themed. Aside from Ranger, I mean, the other thing you would think of as, like, a swashbuckler type thing would be Warrior, but we did just get a Warrior. So,
yeah,
not that.
Assassin also kind of feels similar to that as well. Like, if I think about kind of some of the, like the sort of people who would use a ship, like an Assassin comes to mind, right?
yeah, I mean, Assassin's Creed Black Flag is like the thing is right there, right? The whole theme is like you have it already. Obviously, I think a pirate wizard makes total sense. Like, what,
Of course you do.
like, if you watch Pirates of the Caribbean, they're all doing magic on those ships. So give me a pirate wizard. Some people are thinking new class like necromancer, because some of the art, like I think Cut Through the Facade in which set was? I think it was not Hunted. I think it was a set before it.
It's Rosetta. It's Rosetta. It's a
Rosetta,
card,
right? Yeah,
card Rosetta.
Yeah, it has like a necromancy sort of theme to it. So some people think necromancer, which I think also makes sense, like a ghost pirate ship type stuff. But yeah, aside from ranger, I'm honestly at a bit of a loss.
It's not brute. I think we can probably. It'd be weird to see brute. I imagine. Well, they might subvert expectations there, but I would say the classes that it's less likely to be is brute and guardian. Mechanologist I wouldn't rule out, but
could be. The
Steampunk ships.
Yeah, with a little like mech leg instead of a wooden one. Anyway, I just hope Riptide gets some support, since it is he is sort of pirate-ish themed, and he runs Trench. So I hope we get playable Riptide.
Makes sense.
Next, I think we have a deck tech coming up on the channel.
Yes.
Hayden, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I am very privileged this weekend. I'm going to be recording, so it'll be out in probably about a week, probably around... I want to get it up before next weekend, before week 3 of Road to Nationals, in case you do want to play this deck. But I've got Jason Long, recent calling top 8er from Christchurch, who was 1/3 of the group that came up with the Araknis Slip Through the Crack decks that did really well at that event. One in top 8, one top 16, one in top 32. Very unique sort of take, some interesting things I think going on, and they put a lot of time and effort. These guys always do this. There's the 3 of them, including Khoi Din, who is the 2-time Vietnamese national champion, and Isaac, who won the very first calling. Did he win? Yeah, he won the very first ever calling, the limited calling in New Zealand. So they get together before any of these APAC callings, and they'll come up with something spicy. Last time they came up with a fatigue dash deck that was ridiculous. Played all the like mech arms and Evo arms and stuff to just like I played Jason in that event. He fatigued me. I was on Dromai. He fatigued me with dash. Which is exactly insane.
Roma, wild.
And I knew what he was playing, so I played like 67 cards. Like I was prepared for it, double remembrance, everything. Still got fatigued. Hilarious. So anyway, got him coming on to share that Slippy deck tech, which I'm very excited about. And I think you've got something going on as well.
Yeah, so we'll be starting a new series on the show. I won't spoil it too much, but be on the lookout for that early next week. It's going to be a new series. I'm going to leave it at that, and y'all will just have to wait for when it starts to understand what it is.
We've got a lot of content. We've got a lot of additional content coming this year, which me and Pankaj are both very excited about. So February kicks it off. I know we'd teased it before the end of last year. We said February is where we're targeting, so we're here and we're ready to deliver.
And aside from the new content, Hayden, we just had our first weekend of RTN season, and with 3 more weeks underway. So let's take a moment to discuss the results from week 1. So in the realm of Classic Constructed, we had Viceroy and Nu leading the pack in terms of wins for RTNs, both of them at 14. And then Aurora just under them at 13, Syndra at 11. And then we have Marinette at 8, Prism Awaken of Soul at 7, Enigma at 6. And I'll say these are like the top half of performing heroes in CC right now. Do you have any thoughts on these results?
Yeah, I think, first of all, we're inching closer to Viceroy hitting Living Legend, which is, it's happening. We're, at this point, it looks like Viceroy will Living Legend in the last week, probably. I mean, there's a chance it could Living Legend next week, so not this week, but next week, just based on rate of wins. Zen actually looks like it might not Living Legend, which is quite interesting, which we can get into. I think in terms of results, I mean, this is basically more or less what I expected when it came to trying to work out this meta ahead of last weekend and playing in Christchurch. I think probably the one standout though obviously is Nu, right? Like Viceroy, yes, been talked about as one of the best decks in the format. Syndra at 11 wins there. It's also taken out two callings now, right? In terms of since its release, so it makes sense. Aurora actually I think also does make sense to a degree. We saw the rise of it in Christchurch. Not sure what it was like in Portland, but also just as an aggro deck that can actually, I think, go toe to toe with Syndra, right, in that space, and also has longevity against these decks that are trying to maybe play more control and more fatigue. But yeah, Nu is interesting to me. I guess one thing that does help Nu is that Enigma is close to unplayable if you're not playing CYB. I think so. That is very big for Nu right now.
With Syndras and Auroras and Viserais running around, yeah, playing Enigma seems real rough. But for me, the one standout in this top half is actually a missing character, which is Zen. Especially with Viserai being at 14 wins and being the top performing CC deck. Where are the Zens? How are they simply not converting? And even at the recent Callings and Battle Hardens, the Zens have just been missing from the top 8s.
Do you know what I think it is when it comes to Zen? I think
the deck is just bad.
No, I don't think it's just. I think people's decks are a bit bad. Honestly, I think Zen has this stigma of like, oh, Zen builds in one way, and I think that's honestly what's hurting people right now is that they're taking the latest Zen list, the Cody Williams, the Nick Butcher's list of the last months or two, and basically running back the same list without necessarily consideration for the current meta. And hey, come at me, say what you will. Obviously, Nu performing well is not good for Zen, right? And that is kind of just a natural, ships passing in the night of, okay, Nu comes up, Zen starts to drop away. But yeah, to your point, I think Zen is still pretty good if you just tweak it a little bit to understand that there's an aggro meta right now. I think you can play a Zen deck that is good into Viserai, that is good into Aurora, that is good into Syndra. I think the one challenge, though, is it good enough? Or are you just building to a 55% a deck and you're probably better off playing something else? That is probably the current question.
I think the building it for an aggro meta might be part of the problem, actually. So I played against a Zen at the Battle Hardened, and they had wax on, wax offs. They had like a whole bunch of D-reacts in their Zen deck. But that also means the number of clunky hands they have has just shot up through the roof. And so you have to wonder, like, they're like, okay, they can wax on, wax off you, but then they can't do anything with the tempo because they're just holding these D-reacts. And they're holding Warmongers and stuff. And it's just like, okay, so unless you drew exactly like a chi and like a functional hand in your deck full of D-reacts, you can't actually do anything with the tempo or with the life you've gained. And I wonder if that's part of it, right? They're like, oh, it's aggro meta, I need the Z-reacts. And then they've moved too far in that direction. And then now they lack the aggression to capitalize on when they get tempo or to be the illusionist even, maybe.
Yeah, honestly, I think that is true. And I think that is because they're not playing the right cards. I don't think wax on, wax off is actually that good. Like, I think it's good in the mirror because of the way the game digresses and what happens in the Zen matchup. Like, you are just trying to buy turns. But to your point, okay, you do that against... Because also Zen can brick, right? But you do that against a deck that isn't Zen, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, that's fine. Like, they'll block out, give you tempo back or whatever, and then if you can't do anything, they're just going to wait, and then they're going to have their big turn. It just doesn't... And that's why I think Aurora is punishing people for playing this wax on wax. What is more threatening, in my view, is stick some attacks that have on-hits in them in your deck. That is way more effective. And I know we've spoken this in the past. It's maybe a little bit harder with Aurora, but, there's some good things. But, stick your... What are your erase faces doing at this point? What are they hanging out doing,
They help you against Syndra, I guess. But yeah, I was thinking about it. You make a Zen state against Syndra, and then she just goes, okay, 3 head jabs, and you have to block them anyway, because even though they're only coming in for 2, she's still going to threaten mask unless you block them. So you're kind of just like in this permanent blocking pattern, and it's like, sure, where's your big pivot? You get a traverse turn, but yeah.
Yeah, where's the dash, man? Where's the dash? That's what I want to know as well.
Mm-hmm. I do also want to point out Prism is having a bit of a comeback, which makes sense if you look at this top half of the thing, like Nu, Aurora, Syndra. That Prism just makes sense slotting it, and that physically hurts me. I'm really upset that this hero is coming back. But yeah, be on the lookout for her as well. I think people need to start making game plans for her, especially with Enigma going down as well. This just feels like this Prism's time to shine. Yeah,
it's so good into Syndra. I was sat next to someone on the weekend, just hanging their head, being like, "How do I deal with all these big Phantasm attacks?" You don't.
Yeah, you just die. And it's like, oh, they don't get full Ward 4 from the Angels. It doesn't matter because they got like 7 from all the attacks, and the Erudition's always drawing cards because Syndra has no armor and no poppers, and it's just, okay.
Yeah, this might be a weird thing to ask because it just won 2 callings, but is Syndra actually good?
I think Syndra is good, but I do think, and this relates to our main topic a little bit, actually. I do think a lot of her success was due to people not knowing how to play against her yet.
Yeah.
And I expect her stock to go down. And yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about that and more in our main topic about the power of the unknown.
Well, I would have expected that to happen in Christchurch, but, and I thought that was going to happen. I felt prepared of, Syndra feels very easy to beat, and then it went and won the event. So it is interesting. I mean, obviously, that could just be a bit of an outlier to the general trend that we're maybe potentially going to see. I wouldn't be surprised if Syndra wins half of the same number of Road to Nationals next weekend. My last call out on this is that obviously there's no Guardians listed here. There's no real. Is Enigma even on here? No, right?
Enigma's there right next to.
Oh, sorry, 6 wins. Okay, so there's no real. I guess this all feels very aggressive / mid-rangey. So we're going to talk about Jarl, I think, a little bit as well. Jarl was one that is interesting to me this weekend. I might play Dash this weekend, weirdly. So I think Dash in Victor Extraordinaire has really good numbers, still some of the best numbers, and there's a little card, I'm going to forget the name of it now, I'm going to have to look it up, but it prevents 1 damage. If you take exactly 1 damage, it prevents it. I think that card is maybe...
Dissolution Sphere?
Is that what it's called? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it's called.
Card's pretty good
Dissolution
right now, I
Sphere.
think. I don't know.
Yeah, all our listeners, you can cross that one off your bingo card. Hayden Dale says he's going to take Dash somewhere this weekend. If I took a shot every time you said that. But okay, so to be fair, aside from poking fun of you for thinking mech is playable, I will point out someone this past weekend, I think, was that at the Battle Hardened? Yes, one of my locals actually was on Dash.io, and they were telling me about their plan into Syndra being T-Bones. And I was like, wait, that actually makes a lot of sense. You don't even need to T-Bone Meganetic them.
Nope.
The second T-Bone already takes a very important piece from Syndra, because they need the chest, the arms, and the headpiece.
It probably takes the
to
chest,
do what they're trying to do.
depending on the turn you're
at.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll give you the chest, but that's still a lot of value. Not all their 1 costs are just dead cards in their deck, and they do have a fair number of them. And those are also the more powerful ones, right? The ending on the breaking point, or ending on the 1 for 7 if they have a fealty. So even if that's just 2 T-Bones. You T-Bone them again, and then their deck just crumbles completely. They either don't have Mask or they don't have Flick, and then you're just completely chilling. So
I'm on 9
I don't
T-Bones.
hate
I'm on
the
9
idea,
T-Bones. I tell you.
Yeah. I don't hate the idea. It's still, I still feel you probably just have a better option.
Probably.
But, all right,
Probably.
Yeah.
Let's get into Command Cookout. This question this week is actually ripped from our Q&A episode a few weeks back at this point. We didn't get through all the questions, and we said that we would address them over the coming weeks on podcasts and the like. And I had to pull this one out because his name is very familiar to me. Someone that I would call a friend. Hayden from 3 Floating writes in a question. What mental shortcuts do you find yourself deploying to keep the evaluation of value on any given turn cycle efficient and effective for clean 55-minute games? I'm going to reword this slightly. What Hayden is talking about is how do you save time during a game by using mental shortcuts to do plays or have, I guess, as Brendan would love to say, heuristics for making sure that you can make a play, reference the situation, and save time, which honestly I think is really important in a lot of formats, and I actually think it's going to be pretty important in this format because I do think fatigue is a very viable option in this format at this current stage. I think it's a great question. Pankaj, what are your thoughts?
So I'm not entirely sure if I take mental shortcuts during the game itself, but for me, I think where my time saving comes is making sure I have a deep understanding of my game plan beforehand. So I'm not making those decisions, those critical decisions during the game. So for example, when I'm playing new and I'm against Viserai, I know my game plan is to threaten fatigue, which means that, and this has happened before, where I'm holding a live Bonds of Agony, but this is the turn they have decided to pop their Rune Chants and send a Ninth Blade at me or something. It doesn't matter that I'm holding this live Bonds of Agony. I don't need to take time to decide right there, am I sending a Bonds of Agony or am I taking damage? I just pitch my hand and just block as efficiently as possible because that decision had already been made beforehand, which is what is my game plan in this matchup. Now, I do take a moment to maybe think about, is this an exception to that? If my opponent is if they're not sending lethal and I'm going to send lethal, maybe that is an exception. But in most cases, I'll be okay, no, we've been here before. I'm just supposed to play conservatively, save as much life as possible. make them do the setup again and punish them the turn afterwards. So I would say that's where the shortcuts happen.
I think it's a shortcut. Like I do the same, and that comes through testing. And honestly, it's been the biggest blind spot in my game. If I'm not familiar with the strategy, or I don't have those kind of heuristics, cheats. I'm just gonna keep saying it just for fun now. Just channel Brendan. Then I honestly feel like I do play a lot worse. I feel like I have to spend more time. I'm not a particularly fast player. I'm definitely not a slow player, but it's something that I am very cognizant of depending on the deck that I'm playing, that I try to make sure that I have these game plans nailed down so that I can play quickly, and at times very quickly. For instance, I played, CYB Enigma. 80% of my games were going to be fatigue, 70%, or at least running my opponent out of threats before I killed them. Like, I knew this was going to happen in the weekend. I'd done a lot of that for Worlds, luckily, so I knew a lot of the game patterns and the play patterns. Like, it's just things like, the other things I default to is, what is the known best use of advantage or best use case of something? For instance, it's like, okay, I use Phantasmal Footsteps on the first available chain link where it makes the most sense, so that if they do break the chain, I will get the value from it. Like that is, it's just things like that, right? Those are the mental shortcuts that I create for any one given deck that I'm playing. There's something else that, because I fully echo what you said, there's one other thing else I want to say, which I add to this, and I guess I would call this like state of change. So one of the best things I think you can do as a player of Flesh and Blood is play on both turns of the game, right? You are consistently evaluating and reevaluating the game state on, actually mostly not your turn, but your opponent's turn. So you draw up your 4 cards, it's now currently your opponent's turn. You had an idea of what you were probably going to do on this turn, roughly, because either you've just gained tempo, or you've lost tempo, or it's sort of stayed status quo, you're just trading hand cycles, you've arsenaled a card that you want to set up, for instance, and you're looking for how that setup might pay off. So as soon as you've already got a direction, I would say, in terms of what your next turn or 2 or 3 or 4 might look like, and then your opponent has their turn while you're looking at your 4 cards and evaluating that current situation, and then your opponent starts to play cards, and then you're going to reevaluate the situation. But you're not going to fully reevaluate the situation. Your whole game plan doesn't tip on its head. It's just that you make small changes, you make small tweaks, you take in important pieces of information to change what you think you're going to do. And I think my mental shortcut or my tip or trick there is that sometimes your opponent's going to do something that has zero relevance to the rest of their turn or to your turn, and you should never expend mental energy on that. So I'll use an example. They play a Sigil of Solace out. Most of the time, that's going to have zero impact on anything you were planning to do or they were planning to necessarily do. Like, it could be to clear an arsenal, it could be playing a non-attack action as Viserai to set up their turn. Let's say you're early in the game, they play a Malefic Incantation. That's going to have very little impact on what you do on your turn or even what you plan to do in blocking their turn. It's for future state. It's just damage. So I do think those are the kind of things where you reevaluate, as opposed to, okay, they are on a go again chain link and they have 1 card in hand and 2 resources available. How likely is this to be a CNC? That's the things that are then going to start to change my thought process. So I really do think it is a case of taking in the information, but discarding information that doesn't matter, and also information that isn't relevant to your game plan. If my game plan is just to kill them in 3 turns with pure damage, then unless they're doing something disruptive, their vanilla damage does not mean anything to me, and I don't need to even think about that or fact that it's my game plan. So that idea of state of change and playing on both sides of the table and reevaluating, but only reevaluating the important information, I think is almost a mental shortcut in some ways.
I think a lot of it also simply comes down to reps as well.
Yeah.
So I think one example that comes to mind for me is Aurora, right? Oftentimes, if you're playing against Aurora and there's a CLV on the table, you kind of need to decide on chain link 1 whether you are stopping the CLV this turn or not. And like, that's a mental shortcut, right? You're like, oh, okay, if I block like this, I'll stop this chain link, but am I realistically blocking out the rest of the turn? No. Then you start to think about, okay, how to just make your turn most efficient and not think about blocking out the CLV anymore. And then that's in a sense a mental shortcut, because you're not thinking of stopping it on hit anymore, because you've already accepted, because you've been in a spot before and you know that if they're holding 4 cards, you're not going to be able to stop it anyway. So you just like let them have it, and then you've just taken a shortcut and you don't need to decide on each chain link how you're blocking this.
Yeah, no, I love that. I want to go one step further with that as well, of almost these repetitions of things you've experienced before, to that extent of like, okay, you decide that you do want to block on a chain link because it's the most efficient thing to do with your hand this turn, but you know you can't block out Channel Lightning Valley. But from experience, you know that if you block out the first chain link, it makes their hand the most complicated because they don't get to draw a card until minimum the second chain. They might not have another go again, whereas you don't block on the first one, they might draw the extra go again. So there's just those small things that you learn and that you keep a hold of so that you don't need to make those decisions over and over and over again. They are purely from reps. And honestly, I'd be curious what you think about this, but I think when that comes to time-saving exercises in a game of Flesh and Blood, for me, those repetitions or those things that have come up repeatedly or a thing you know about that game plan that you're going to do almost every single time, sometimes you might stop and check to think about it. I think that is like 85% of the time saving that you make in a game of Flesh and Blood.
For sure. And actually, so far, I think we've only been speaking about the defensive side of it. We're talking about like blocking out the Aurora or pitching, like are you blocking out the Viscerai? But the same thing, the reps which you have your own deck also just save you so much time on that as well. Like, you draw certain hands as new and you know this is turn on bonds or not, the kind of stuff. Or you draw like a blue and a Codex and you're like, hey, block these other two cards, my Tunic sub, I go Dagger, Codex, CNC, right? It's just like these certain play patterns you just get so used to because you have the reps in the deck and it just becomes like, I don't call it muscle memory because you really should be evaluating it again, but you do save a lot of time by just knowing inherently like this is a powerful play and this is the play line this hand leads to, rather than starting from scratch, if you will.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Well, great question from Aiden, and shout out to 3 Floating. If you're not already subscribed to their channel and watching their videos, I mean, I've seen their subscribers. I assume everyone is watching, but if you're not, you should get over there and check out their gameplay videos because they are sick. And we love the whole crew over at 3 Floating. If you want to get your questions in for Command and Cookout, please do so. We have a bit of a backlog, thanks to that Q&A session plus some other questions, but you can get them in. We'll get them on the list. You can hit us up at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com if you want to email them. If you want to drop them in the YouTube comments below, if you're a video watcher, please do so. Just let us know. It is a Command and Cookout question in your comment. If you're an Arsenal Pass patron, drop it in the Discord, or you can give us a handwritten note, verbal note, preferably handwritten, surely, as some have done in the past for us when we're at events. We'll be out in events over the next few months. We've got Road to Nationals. We've got callings. We've got Pro Tours. Things are coming up. You'll see us around.
Mm-hmm. We were also a little bit selfish the past 2 weeks. We both brought on guests and asked them our own questions instead of your questions.
Exactly.
So it's a bit
sorry about that.
A bit more of a backlog.
Sorry, not sorry? Yeah, no. All right. Let's get into the main topic of the pod. And this week on the show, we're talking about some of those I don't want to say underrated, but maybe unknowns. Those decks that show up and have an impact. Those rogue decks, if you like. We're going to break down a little bit what makes them successful. Why are we seeing them pop up? Maybe more so, honestly, now than we ever have, or at least those strategies. And it's not that we haven't seen them in the past, but we are seeing them pop up. And this, I think, for me, and the reason wanting to do this comes off the back of, particularly last weekend with Verdance taking out the Battle Hardened in the hands of Margin. The call in Christchurch with Araknis slipped through the cracks, being this kind of new fresh face thing. And it's not that people didn't know that Arachne could be a deck, but it was kind of maybe seen as pretty fringe, maybe even still is, but had a good result in the weekend. There's been a bit of that over the last few weeks as well. Jarl also won the Battle Hardened in Spain, right? Like
Barcelona.
Yeah, Barcelona. Yep. Like there is things happening out there that aren't your, yes, Syndra won 2 in a row, but it's not like Zen's cleaning up. It's not like Viscerai's cleaning up. Like, yeah, they're putting up results. Viscerai's putting up results, but it's not winning these events. These rogue decks are. So I thought we'd talk a bit about what makes these strategies successful as well, and maybe just start, Pankaj, with a little bit of a history of some of these rogue decks that have done well, just to illustrate that it's not a new thing, and there's some common threads that we can pull out from these. So I wanted to talk about some, and feel free to riff on any of these. Pankaj, as we go. Why don't we go one for one on these? We can talk about them a little bit. So I'll start. Kano, PT1, a pretty obvious one of the, I guess, first big breakout rogue decks at a high level event that we saw Alexander Vor and Sasha Markovic both in top 8 with slightly different lists at Pro Tour number 1 on Kano.
We also had Michael Hamilton's Bowlander, which was the first time we saw that iteration of Icelander come up was US Nationals. I forget the year, 2023? 2? 3? I think it was
22.
22. I think it was, yeah.
Because he won Worlds 22 on the same deck.
Yes, you're right. He won Worlds 2022. Yeah, so he brings Bowlander to US Nats, and everyone doesn't really know how to play against it. And we saw that happening throughout the tournament, right? Like late in the tournament,
We saw it in
people
the
are like,
finals.
"Oh, am I supposed to bring armor into this and not bring any AB kind of thing?" Or there was also Arsenaling a Sink Below against Bulllander, and then that kind of losing the ice under the game. So and it was interesting because he also brought it to Worlds, and I guess at that point people maybe a bit more prepared, and he lost the unknown factor of it. And at that point, maybe he was just going off the deck just being really, really strong.
Yeah, I mean, Bullen is one of the best decks that's been available in Flesh and Blood. So it was like a breakout weekend for sure, but also the deck was just really good. Speaking of US Nationals, Fatigue Briar the following year, 2023, with Charles, I think, with winning that Nationals.
Charles Dunn.
Yeah, Fatigue Briar, which people had seen that deck in smatterings before. People didn't really take it seriously, but primed the meta, understood. I mean, again, we saw people misplaying on camera. It's harsh to say misplaying, but not understanding the right strategies they should be on, and unfortunately not playing optimally or anywhere near optimally in some games, and losing significantly because of that.
Especially when the narrative for that event was Lexi, right? Lexi being the massive boogeyman of the format, and then Math Briar showing up and actually just kind of destroying them. And you have to imagine, like, many of those Lexis in the early rounds at least, just bringing in the lean 60, not knowing that the Briar is going to fatigue them, and then just kind of just losing from the sideboard. The other deck, again, another Michael Hamilton special. CYB new at Worlds last year, also kind of caught people by surprise. That deck, I think there were rumors about it a week before Worlds, because he brought it to a Pro Quest. But before that, the talk of the town for CYB was all Enigma, and he put it in new and made it work.
Yep. Araknis at Christchurch last weekend, coming out and being this kind of aggro deck, but combo-esque aggro deck that, myself included, didn't know how to tackle and try to counter, and got significantly punished by it.
Yep, and then we've got Verdance. That's a combo deck that won last weekend. And while we're on last weekend, I'll just put in the Jarl in there as well. Also winning last weekend on a sort of fringer hero that people weren't really expecting.
Yeah, and Jarl in an interesting position where it's like, okay, a lot of people don't know much about this hero because maybe they haven't tested as much against it, but also Jarl has access to Earth, has access to Ice, has access to... I'm going to guess, I need to go and fact check myself, it probably has access to the biggest card pool in the game right now in Classic Constructed. I'd have to go and double check that, but it'll be close, if not number one. So a lot of different ways to build it. You can build it Ice, you can build it Earth, you can build it sort of mid-rangey, you can build it Fatigue, like CYV, for instance, right? So very hard to know what to do there, and it has a big unknown factor. And then I want to go to Ninja Turtle Katsu at the first ever Classic Constructed calling, which took everyone by surprise, and Brendan Patrick was a part of that. Sasha Markovic winning that event on a deck that people just did not expect, didn't know what was doing, didn't understand the power of Drone Brutality at the time. Was the first kind of rogue deck to come out of the woodwork when everyone was like, it's Dorinthia and it's Katsu, and there's a little bit of Guardian, and Reinar's unplayable. And they then said, well, we'll play a deck that folds to Reinar but beats everything else.
That was before my time, but yes, I have heard those comments about the Katsu deck before. But something that was definitely within my time, Hayden, was actually this past 2 weeks. And I do want to shout out Syndra actually being in the similar spot. I think the first couple of weeks of Syndra coming out, and we did allude to this earlier on in the pod, is people just didn't really know how to block against this deck yet. The Flick Knives Mask of Momentum interaction is such a powerful thing, and when people aren't expecting it, they're sort of treating it like the way they treat other ninjas, right? Where they block on the second link, but that's like kind of the worst link to block against Syndra, because you just flick you on that link, and you're not prepared to have to block the next one as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like, not only people maybe forgotten how to block against Mask of Momentum in general, but also just, Flick Knives, like you say. Once you've played against that deck a couple times, it's like, you just block the third chain link. Like, you don't block until the third chain link because you have no reason to, because they will be able to push it over. So once you learn that, it does change it a lot. Combo Viscerai. We saw this at the calling in Florida at the second ever US Nationals. First ever US Nationals, I believe, which was won by Mr. Tarak Patel. At that calling side event, Matt Rogers took top 8, and then a couple of weeks later, we took that list to top 8, or the win at Australian Nationals. I won Australian Nationals that list, a deck that people maybe knew a little bit less about, definitely when Matt played it, and still even when I played it as well. And I just will finish on from that event, that first round of Nationals, Worldwide Nationals, was the Lightning Briar list that just came out of nowhere, and Matt Folks took out UK Nationals. Was much more of a known factor in the following week, but people still getting to grips with how to play to that deck, and we're still trying to figure out lists, and also took out US Nationals the following week. So that's the history of some of these decks that come out of the woodwork, have a big impact, and there is others as well, but I think these are the most high-profile ones. So I guess it kind of leads me to the question is, in your view, Pankaj, what makes the Unknown so powerful when it comes to decks in Flesh and Blood and people showing up with these strategies?
For me, the biggest thing is, this is it's a very broad answer, but it's opponents not knowing how to play against it. And in a sense, you can put that under opponents making mistakes into your Unknown, but that's kind of your strength, right? Like, because they don't know what you're doing, you get this massive leeway to just outplay them because you have this massive information, this information gap, right? And two examples come to mind immediately for me here, which is the first one that comes to mind is when I played the Battle Hardened Seattle last year, and it was shortly after MST release, right? People were still, figuring out the cards and stuff. I actually matched up against Brody, and there's Brody, right? He's like a grinder. He plays the game a lot. He should know all these things. I was playing new into his Zen, and I play Bonds of Agony, and he lets it through. He blocks in a way where if I can turn on the effect, it's going to go through, and I get to snipe 2 Harmonies of the Hunt from his hand, which after today, if someone is holding 2 of the same card against Bonds of Agony, no matter what, you slap one of them down always, right? Whereas back in the day when people aren't used to playing against new yet, even the really, really strong players still kind of just make mistakes like this. They just forget, they miss these interactions that these opponents are doing. Just they don't really know what to do in certain situations that these other players put them in. So for example, Bonds of Agony, holding 2 of the same card, block at least one of them. So there's that. The other one that comes to mind actually this past weekend, I was spectating a bunch of Margin's top 8 games at the Battle Hardened, and in his finals, and he spoke about this in his story time. If y'all haven't gone and seen Margin-based story time, definitely go watch that. Super entertaining. But yeah, in his finals game against the Azalea opponent going to 1 when he Slush Riders up, right? That's just another instance of you haven't been juiced by this against his deck, and so you just forget that this is a thing they can do, and then you go to 1 against Riders, and then the game kind of just ended on the spot over there, right? Before the Azalea even effectively gets to do anything on their turn.
Yeah. There was one from the weekend on my side as well. This Slip Through the Crack deck, one of the things that it does is it plays the new Mask.
Toxicity?
No, but that is
okay.
one. But that is one interaction people also didn't understand is that, yes, the attack is a dagger, and you can pump some massive damage with Toxicity. But the other one is the new Mask. And there was a game where someone was playing into them, and they had attacked, and I can't remember, they had gotten Go Again because of hitting against the hero, right? I can't even remember what it was. Oh, they were marked maybe? I can't remember what it was. So they got Go Again for attacking the hero specifically, and then they block with the Mask and they transform into a new hero, and the attack no longer has Go Again. If I have to find the card that the reason the interaction happened, it must have been I'll go and find it.
I thought Marionettes, were they against a Marionette?
Yeah, potentially.
But Marinette, the attack gets Go Again upon hitting. It might have been a different
I'll find out what it was. I just remember I was trying to, as you were talking, I was like, oh, there's one from the weekend, a very specific example, and I can't remember why they had specifically Go Again against oh no, you know what it was. They were playing against an assassin, and Araknis slipped through the cracks, gave their attack Go Again, but they transformed into a different hero, which was no longer slipped through the cracks, so their attack no longer had Go Again. That's what happened. Sorry.
I see. Oh, that's brilliant. Oh, that's really, really cool, actually. That's really cool.
A missed interaction there, which is quite funny. God. So, yeah, anyway, I thought that was quite cool.
Interesting. Today I learned that as well, because I wasn't sure about the timing of it. There's attack gain the Go Again, and then you can in a sense remove the Go Again.
Yeah, it no longer has
I guess
Go
it's
Again.
not. It didn't gain Go Again. There's a persistent effect that says this has Go Again, and then that effect get removed. Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, that's quite funny. There you go. We got there in the end. I remembered it. But yeah, those.
Yeah. So actually, that reminds me a little bit. Actually, one sort of unknown thing that we actually didn't talk about in our list, Prism as well, right? When the new Prism came out and was starting to have an impact on the meta during the heavy hitter season, so many people didn't know about the Halo interactions, and then they get completely juiced by it, right? You send an attack into an Angel, and the Prism goes, I'm just going to Halo out my Figment of Ravages, snipe my own Angel, and then your turn just ends here, right? So it just comes back to, I think when you ask me the question, what makes it so powerful, it's just opponents making all these mistakes, like falling into your game plans, falling into your traps, if you will, and you just having this massive leeway to outplay them because you have this information advantage.
Yeah, it's the same thing of like, you prep for an event, right? And just riffing off what you said, because I agree, I think it is the biggest factor in what makes the unknown so powerful. You prepare for this event, you build your strategy, you build your deck, or you net deck your strategy and learn it and understand how to play against the key matchups. And, you're probably going to make the odd mistake, but most of those mistakes are going to be sequencing mistakes. They're going to be forgetting to do something. They're generally not going to be getting caught out by something. But when you play against the unknown, or even things that are a bit more fringe, you might have an idea of roughly what they do. You might have heard about what they do from playing, or from a friend or whatever. But when you play into it, there's just these things that can just catch you out and get you, because the game is quite technical. And that's just one aspect of it, right? Like it is to what you said. It's it's the not knowing the strategy. It's not understanding the matchup. But then also the mistakes start to creep in as well, because we talked before in the Command and Cookout, right? What are some of those mental shortcuts? Well, it's knowing the matchup and it's being able to play at a good pace because you remember these things, and all of a sudden you have to start to slow down and think about the interactions and come up with your game plan a little bit on the fly, and that can lead to even more mistakes. So it's like this compounding thing of not just the technical aspects of what the deck across from you is doing and the player across from you is doing, but also how that changes what you have to do and how you have to play, and all of a sudden things that you've not considered before or playing in different ways than you have had to before start to come in, and they compound. Now you're double, triple, 4 times more decision points than you would have in a normal game because of this unknown. And I think that is a really, really real factor. I also want to add on, when it comes to just trying to understand on the fly what game plan to play, people just end up sideboarding wrong. And I think that is a really big factor. They I think at times, and this is why I think linear decks are so hard to play rogue against, because they'll be, I'll just do the same thing I always do. And so I think that's a bit more hard to disrupt. But if you're playing something that's more mid-rangey, maybe something that has to decide on its game plan because it has different in-game situations, those are the decks where if you sideboard wrong, put too many defense reactions in against a deck you think's going to be aggressive and they're not, you can throw off your game plan, and your opponent is like getting double value because not only do they have an unknown game plan, but you've also mis-sideboarded against it and destroyed done something detrimental to your own game plan and what your deck is trying to do.
And you mentioned that you might have an idea of how to play into these unknown strategies. I want to expand on that a little bit more as well. I think typically where people default to when they're trying to guess how to play against this new thing is they kind of just play against how they would play against a hero of the same class, but a different hero.
Good shout.
And you see that happen a lot, right? And that leads to people like against Syndra being like, oh, Mask of Momentum deck. Oh, I played against Ira before. I blocked the second chain link. And then Syndra's like, all right, I just juiced you because you blocked on the second chain link. That's not what you're supposed to do. Against Wizard as well. And I think back when Iyslander first came out, people were like, oh yeah, you play against this like how you play against Kano, right? You just try and race. You just try and keep 5 cards always and just like try and race them. And you get juiced by a CLF or a Hypothermia at instant speed. It's like, because she had that when she first came out. And you're like, wait, no, this is not how you're supposed to play against this Wizard. And in a sense, you having that idea of how to play, like if your idea is just coming from I play against the other hero of the same class in this way, that can actually hurt you way more than if you just went it a little bit blind.
Yeah, no, I agree. The last one I kind of want to mention on this theme of what makes the unknown so powerful, and I actually think this one is probably less relevant than the two we've just spoken about, and I think people might be surprised to hear me say that, but not having the right cards to deal with it is actually last on my list. And people will go, well, if you don't have Arcane Barrier, you're never going to be able to beat Wizards. Sometimes, yeah, that's true, but that's one aspect, right? A lot of the time it doesn't come down to the specific cards. It comes down to just generally what your deck does into that matchup, so just generally how it might play into that hero in general and that strategy. And then it comes down to the nuances of the game plans and understanding the weaknesses of your opponent's deck. So, I mean, I'll use an example, right? I kind of spoke about it before. I said that I lost to Jason Long at this event a year ago where he played, longer than a year ago now, where he played this Fatigue Dash deck. And it's like, that deck was so tuned to Fatigue, Lexies, and honestly, even Tromai's, that really you could understand the game plan, and you could have maybe even more cards against Fatigue, but it honestly probably isn't even going to be enough because they've just got so much redundancy in their deck. Sometimes there will be impacts to the cards, and they can matter. For instance, Shock Charmers, right? When we went to PT1, Kano into Starvo felt like a very different matchup depending if they had Shock Charmers or not. And there's other aspects of that with Kano, with Icelander and things as well. But the last kind of, I guess, example of slightly different is I'll talk about Icelander. Often you could have, some cards that would have impact. You'd have your Arcane Barrier, you'd have the right equipment set up. But actually, that wouldn't necessarily change things massively. It was more about how the game unfolded, the game plans you played to, the decisions you made around Frostbites and their key Channel Lake Frigid turns and Hypothermia turns and Blizzard turns, more so than if you had AB2 or AB3. Actually, honestly, a lot of the time, didn't matter. It wasn't really a big part of the game. It was more the game itself that mattered.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that. It's not that you didn't have the right cards, but it's also, were you using the cards you had properly, in the sense that I think for a lot of these unknown matchups, your power cards change, right? Your power cards are straight up different, but you may not realize it because you're against this unknown thing. So I want to use your example of the Dromai Dash thing. So I don't know if this applies. I'm just spitballing here.
We'll see.
But I wonder if, suppose there's that Fatigue Dash deck becomes popular and you get a whole bunch of reps into it, then cards like Kyloria, maybe to steal their induction chambers, suddenly becomes a power card that you can't just throw away, right? You can't just, normally Dromai is just Kyloria, it's fine. Rake the Embers is what I need for Fatigue matchups. And you really preserve the rakes. But you have to wonder, it's Fatigue Dash once you get more reps. Maybe you're you know what? Maybe I need pitch stack Kylorias too. And then you do 3 Kylorias in a turn and you steal the items, and then now that's a power card, which you weren't aware of the first time you played that matchup. So it's not just, you didn't have the right cards or whatever, but are you using the cards? Are you recognizing that some of your cards that weren't power cards in other matchups are actually power cards now?
I love that. I think that's so true. And I think that extends to a lot of decks that have varying effects, varying powerful cards. So a lot of decks will just have redundancy and very one-directional cards that build towards a certain plan. So aggressive decks are pretty typical of this, right? You have cards that say go again, cards that deal damage, cards that might be reactions, for instance. Generally, they're all kind of going to be a much of a muchness, and you might not have what you just spoke about. But as soon as you start to get into combo decks that want to set up specific interactions of 2 or 3 cards together, a mix of defensive and offensive cards, a mix of disruptive and in-game cards, then all of a sudden, those different cards can be different power cards. I think Warrior has that a lot. I think Guardian has that a lot. It is very, very true. These cards, Wizard has it a ton, right? What are the cards that matter the most in any given matchup? Really can change that. One matchup where Sonic Boom is broken and phenomenal. Another matchup it is terrible. It is so dependent on how you utilize the cards as well as actually just having them in the first place. I guess, anything to add more on that for the unknown?
No, I think I'm good to move on to our next bullet point here.
Yeah, I want to talk about replicating success with a rogue deck and ask the question, or pose the question, is there always viable options? Is there always, can you almost always replicate this?
As the hero pool gets bigger, and I think the hero pool is pretty large right now. We did have a conversation about that a couple of months ago. I think it's getting more and more possible to do the replication. I think if you asked me this maybe a year or 2 ago, I would have said, nah, it's not every time. Honestly, around a new set release is probably the best time, which we saw happen, right? Uprising, Icelander comes out. Okay, you can do that. You can play an unknown Icelander deck and juice people. MST comes out. I guess that one wasn't so unknown. Zen kind of people caught on pretty quickly. But Hunted comes out, and now you can juice people with Syndra, this new novel Syndra thing that you didn't really know. So for a while, it was around new set release, you could replicate this a little bit easier. But now with the hero roster being as big as it is, I think it's probably a lot more replicable than you think.
Yeah, it's hero pool. It's also card pool. We're playing an eternal game, right? It is. I do think we actually spoke about this probably about a year ago on the podcast of, something. We went on a similar topic of kind of, decks that, or I guess strategies. We spoke about strategies at that time of maybe strategies that are known, a little bit different, a little bit tweaked. We spoke a lot about you flip a hero and there's certain heroes in this game that you don't know what they're going to play. At the time, we were talking about things like Dash and Katsu. We've obviously come a long way since then. But I do think that is very true. can you always do it? I think the challenge is that the wider the metagame, the harder it is to do. The narrower a metagame is, the more solved a metagame is, the easier it is to do these things. And I think we have seen this pretty repeatedly at the Pro Tour level now, is that people coming with innovations because the meta is more targetable. I think Worlds was a little bit lacking on that front. Obviously, CYB new, we just spoke about. Most of the rest of the decks are pretty predictable, but I will say that the caveat to that is that it was a very powerful format. Like, you had Dash.io doing pretty ridiculous things. It was a very much a check on the format of, could you actually do this? You go back to PTLA, we saw, Dory have a bit of a breakout of that event, both Dawnblade and Hatchet's decks. We even saw some more interesting things happening at that event we've seen in the past. So I do think generally more solved formats are easier to... I mean, that was the reason Kano came about at PT1, because the format was pretty well solved with Chain and Starvo and Prism being like the three pillars of the format. I mean, I think at that event, they were like, those three decks combined were like 70% of the metagame or something. So when that's the case, and I think the one that interests me is that at Baltimore, we had a similar thing where between Lexi Dromai, I think were 42% odd of the format just between those two decks. But it actually wasn't, I don't know, maybe that's the innovation didn't show up there. Maybe the hero pool, the card pool was too small, to your point. But I do think as we go and as we hit these solved metagames, I'm really interested to see what London brings us. I think London could be a prime candidate for some breakout decks, because I think we'll go through Road to Nationals. Yes, this format is quite wide, but there is starting to shape up a pretty clear order of decks. The one spanner in the works is Living Legend, obviously. Viserai probably going to be kicked out, and that will open the format up again, because I think Viserai is a check right now for a lot of decks in this format. But yeah, it's interesting.
To your point, though, there is some sort of self-contradiction in that, right? Like, as the hero pool gets wider, we're like, oh, yeah, this is more likely than you think. At the same time, the wider the metagame, because the hero pool is so wide, the less likely it is that you can pull something off like this. Because even if you find like a unique or unknown strategy, chances are you're gonna have some auto losses because of how wide the meta is.
Yeah, it's like, people might think that sounds like a contradiction, right? But it's like, well, if the meta's wide open, then you've got the chance to bring almost anything, something that could be... And that is true, like, you could bring something, but the problem is people test, and so many people play this game now, and so many people play and get reps in, that if there is something that is that powerful that it's good against a wide field, people will probably find it pretty quickly. It's not this, when you have a narrow metagame, it requires you can rely on very specific things, and you can do very specific things or lean into very specific strategies. When the metagame's wider, you have to consider a lot of things, and actually when it's a wider metagame, what almost always comes out and leads to the top is just the most powerful strategies, the most powerful linear consistent strategies. Whereas when the metagame is a lot more closed off, that's when you can really start to play around and be like, well, I'm just going to target these three decks. I don't have to worry about being super powerful. If I can beat these three decks with whatever the frig the strategy is, then I'm going to win 80% of my matches. If that's, 70% of the meta or whatever, then 70%, like...
Uzuri,
yeah.
I mean, Uzuri at PT Amsterdam comes to mind,
Great
right?
example.
Shoma's like, hey, I just need to beat Zen and Nu. Okay, I'll play Uzuri.
And then
he beat all the Zens and the Nus. And he won the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. Prime
and
example.
then everyone's like, wait, like, Nus are playing against it and, not... Again, because you don't have the reps, you're like, oh, you're getting juiced by inertia traps and stuff, because suddenly there's this assassin across when you're playing inertia trap, and you're like, wait, I wasn't expecting that, and then you're just losing to the unknown.
Yeah, love it. I want to start to wrap up, and one of my thoughts, if we speak about, targetability and ability to do this and replication, is there strategies people haven't touched available to exploit right now, do you think? If so,
I think
come
so.
to mind?
Well, I think... Yeah, I think there are obviously some underexplored heroes. The first one that comes to mind is Riptide.
Yeah.
Especially with Enigma Stonks going down and aggro coming up. I think Riptide, again, falls under the category of what I was saying earlier, where when people don't know what to do against you and they default to what they do against the other hero of your class, they just get extra punished. So, for example... If you're a deck that normally fatigues Azalea, and you're like, oh, it's a ranger, I can fatigue this Riptide, and you will not have a good time. That deck is very... And you bring in your D-Reacts, and then suddenly you're just getting juiced by Dreadbore. Yeah, I could imagine that. Maybe now it wouldn't happen as much, but definitely earlier on was something that would happen a little bit more. And then suddenly maybe the Riptide's not playing Dreadbore. Suddenly you're playing Castaway, Barbed Castaway, and doing aim counter stuff at you, and then you're trying to fatigue them, but it's just like putting too much damage and having random dominates on Stone Rains and things like that.
Yeah, I think Riptide's an interesting one. I think it comes to mind quickly, and that's because it's kind of flirted with being playable a few times, like flirted with being maybe relevant a few times, and ultimately I think it's fallen short because of the kind of two main strategies you can go with Riptide. Either a value kind of Barbed Castaway plan or more of a, like fatigue kind of trap space plan, or not fatigue, but you're defensively dealing damage and then coming in with these key attacks. Decks have just done that better, I think. Or like the strategies I think that have kind of prevailed and have been more reasonable. I think other decks have just done those strategies better, but that might not always be the case.
I think he's falling short because of Viscerai, actually. I think you spoke about how Viscerai is putting a check on a lot of the format. I think he's putting a big check on Riptide. I think Viscerai is not allowed. Like, I think like Enigma is a hard matchup, but Riptide can still get there in that matchup. And then the other top decks, I think Riptide quite positive into, like the Assassins and the Ninja. Maybe not Aurora as well, but you'd probably rather face against Aurora than Viscerai for sure. Like, the Riptide Viscerai is actually just absolutely unwinnable for Riptide.
Yeah, that makes sense. Some other ones that come to mind, and I think ones that have had maybe even less, I guess, flirtation with success. Tickle of Awesome is one that comes to mind for me. I think Tickle of Awesome, as a hero ability, has a powerful hero ability. It just has access to not good tills at the moment, but I do think there is something in there. I've brewed with Tickle of Awesome a little bit. I think it is actually genuinely, there is power in that. There is some powerful cards, but it ultimately, I think, is so susceptible to very aggressive decks and to also decks that have better end games, but that honestly might not always be the case that those decks exist. Enigma's not always going to be in the format, Viscerai's not always going to be in the format.
Yeah, and decks that just have arcane damage as well, I think is something Teklo is a little bit vulnerable to. I do want to shout out Teklo during the heavy hitters meta. I played it at ProQuest and just got completely owned by a Teklo. I was on Kasai at the time, and I just wasn't expecting Teklo at all. And I think even if I was expecting it, I don't know what I would have done against it, just because it just completely wrecked. It was such a good call for that meta, I think. And that player did go ahead and win that ProQuest on Teklo Vossen, which was, a little bit of a surprise. And suddenly I'm seeing these cards where I was like, wait, that's so strong. The blue block card that blocks for one more for each Evo you have, like that thing was like blocking 5. And I was like, wait, what am I supposed to do against this? And yeah, I'm with you on Teklo being in this list.
Teklo stomps fair decks, I think. I do think that is true for the most part.
Yeah. I do want to shout out, like, he did just get Shelter from the Storm as well, which I think is a very, very strong piece for him. Like,
that's true.
I wouldn't be surprised if people start looking at Teklo again with that additional offensive piece and Calming Breeze as well. Like, I don't know, maybe you're going too far down the defensive route, but he did in a sense get a couple more generic defensive tools.
Yeah. I think some other ones that come to mind just from the newer set. I think Fang, probably the most complicated or complex hero anyway in this new set. Very hard to balance off what you do with that hero ability and how you leverage his payoffs. But Fang definitely has some power to it, and I think some of the LSS staff have even alluded to that. Like, Fang is an interesting puzzle to work out. And Arachne Marionette, I think, is probably the more likely of us to just see that deck played more regularly. We've already seen it have some success, so I think that one's maybe a little bit less of a unknown. But yeah, Fang is one. I wouldn't be surprised if we get to London and someone's got a hot Fang deck. I wouldn't be shocked.
I would be, because we talk about the power of the unknown. I think, at least I don't see it, so which is why I would be shocked. Where I think no matter how you build Fang, he's still just gonna be numbers. Maybe he has been better numbers than you expect, but he's not gonna do something very, very he's not gonna randomly fatigue you out of nowhere, right?
No.
Like the way the way the sort of Drone of Brutality Katsu, suddenly you're playing against Katsu, you're expecting an aggro deck, and suddenly they're fatiguing you, or the Briar, where they actually do something you're completely not expecting. Fang feels like, sure, maybe someone builds a smooth Fang deck and it's powerful, but it's still just going to be better numbers. It's not making you mess up your game plan on the fly because it's a strategy you're not expecting. At least that's my current take. Maybe there's a massive disruptive Fang deck out there that exists, but yeah, that one I'll be shocked. On the Marionette note, I actually want to shout out Uzuri. And I think in general, the mark and retrieve stuff, like marking and retrieving, I think is underexplored in the other assassins. I think people have been exploring it a lot in Marinette, and people are starting to understand how Marinette does it, how to play against it a little bit better. Like, people are realizing you need to block Hunter's Clave, for example. Just stop that, and then half their deck is turned off, because like, then you need to be marked, and there's only so many times they can flick you. But I think seeing that sort of packages in Uzuri and Nu, for example, is something that hasn't been explored enough, and I wonder if that can catch people off guard. Especially, the reason Uzuri in particular is because she naturally runs Flick Knives, and if you go Nerve Scalpel, because everyone's running D-Reacts now, you go Nerve Scalpel and you go Hunter's Clave, now you can like Flick Knife, like if they D-React your thing, your Uzuri flip in response, which is the way I always do it, you can Flick Knife that, or you Flick Knife the mark to get your mark payoff, and you have this retrieve card so you can actually flick again and again, whereas previously Uzuri was in a sense balanced run, only flicking the dagger like once a game. So that to me is, I think there is a big pool of exploration that it needs to be done.
Can see that. I'll give the last shout out to Acilio. It's a wizard. It has access to Storm Striders. That's all.
Yep, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, all the Acilio builds we've seen so far don't run Storm Striders, so yeah, could see an Acilio build with Striders suddenly come up.
Any last tips to building an effective rogue deck? I think we both identify as deck builders, maybe you more than me. I maybe have slightly hung up my boots on the deck building aspect, although I'm always down for a brew. But I think we've both at times in our Flesh and Blood tenures been deck builders. Any tips on trying to build something that's a little bit outside the norm?
I'm not entirely sure how to phrase this in a way that's actually useful and not just like that's really obvious. But I mean, kind of like try the okay. I think I know what it is. Try stuff that people have previously written off, but when the meta changes, go back and take a look at them again, like just to make sure. And I think the one that comes to mind for me the most was during Lexi meta, going back to Encase and Weathervane in Icelander, which was Encase was something people wrote off after Icelander came out, but didn't revisit enough, I think, when the meta shifted. And people were playing like Warmongers in Icelander decks before playing Encase into Lexi. And I was like, like stuff like that, I think, would be my tip. Like, there'll be a bunch of stuff you've written off, but make sure you revisit them when the meta shifts.
Yep.
And you're trying to find solutions for new things. Yeah.
I like that one. Mine, I think, would be, again, when meta shifts, I think is the best time to do this, but try to find an exploitation in the meta. And I think this is easy when the meta game is solved, but if all the decks are sharing a commonality of a potential weakness, they're all physical damage dealing, or they all are potentially susceptible to fatigue because they don't run enough in-game threat density, or they're all playing pretty fair and they're potentially susceptible to not being able to deal enough damage in one turn so that you can set up a combo. Those are areas to start with when it comes to building a rogue deck. So I'll use that as an example. Let's say the format devolves to a lot of fair decks that are playing defense reactions. They're trying to trade the best numbers, make the most efficient turn cycles. I actually think we saw this somewhat in the heavy hitters meta when we saw Kasai become a big player. The format started to lean that way a little bit, I would say. Then, okay, how can I exploit that? Well, what about a deck that takes the time to set up and, if it has time, can do something really powerful? I mean, I'll shout out to Pablo Pintor, played Rhinar at PTLA, I think for this reason, honestly, is that he identified that the format was somewhat fair, that people were playing damage trading decks. KO's damage, while yes, good, it was the premier damage dealing deck of the format, and honestly, that's probably one of the lowest output decks we've had from a damage standpoint that would classify itself as an aggro deck in the entirety of Flesh and Blood, honestly, or close to. So, just try and find these gaps in the meta and try and exploit it with it doesn't have to be an unknown strategy. It can just be something that is a little bit less used for this time period. If you want something completely rogue, then I think look for card interactions. Look for, again, things that could exploit the meta, but from a card or an interaction standpoint that people might not expect. Look at those heroes that are underplayed, but I will caution this. Something like a Betsy, for instance, what is the upside you're getting to that? Whereas something like an Acilio, on the other hand, has something potentially powerful that people aren't prepared for. So there's some pros and cons to looking at underplayed heroes. Some of them probably aren't worth your time.
To your point about observe what the meta is doing and try and figure out some way to exploit it. I think something is happening right now in this meta, and I expect a bit of a rise in this card, is Calming Breeze. I think this meta is all about sort of unattractable damage in the form of flick knives, or even just these little daggers like the assassins are doing. Like, and it's even good against Viscerai. You can actually just play it and it blocks 3 rune chants for you. If you look at this whole top half of the first week of our RTN season, Viscerai, Nu, Aurora, Syndra. Calming Breeze is good against all of them. So it's not just your Shelters from the Storm. Something like Calming Breeze also, in a sense, exploits this meta a little bit. And I expect to see its rise because of that reason.
I love it. It's almost like the best... In some ways, it's the best form of a Red Sigil. Because it doesn't just gain you life. It doesn't use your action point, and it also prevents like breakpoints. It stops their game plans. I think we've started to see it a little bit, like in Jarl decks, like the Jarl Fatigue deck I think was playing it. There's a few decks that have been playing it, and I agree. I think the card is a card that people should be looking at. There's a few cards like that just get overlooked for whatever reason because they weren't relevant in a previous meta, or they're new and they kind of got written off. But they can be a part, either just good cards, or they can be a part of a wider sort of strategy. The card that I played this past weekend that I was really impressed with is I played the Blade Beckoner Gloves, the new rare generic arm piece from the set. The card was huge. The card was massive. It was either like Blade Break 2, or it was like a block 1 on attack for a breakpoint and then block a dagger later on. That was insane.
It's in many ways better Stonewall Gauntlet, funnily enough, despite it being, in a sense, draft chaff.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's going to do it for episode 200 of Arsenal Pass. Pankaj, interesting discussion there on the power of the unknown. A great Command and Cookout question. Bit of a breakdown of week 1 of Road to Nationals. This week, are you off to Road to Nationals? How many are you playing? What are you playing? What deck are you going to play? What's your thoughts?
I'm playing 1 RTN per week for the next 3 weeks, and I'm playing all of them as CC. There is a draft one happening. I'm going to see if I can make it to that one as well. But at least the ones I've signed up for. The ones I've signed up for are CC. And at least for this weekend, I'm playing new, and then we'll see how that one goes, and we'll see what I play for the following ones. What about you? You playing any RTNs?
1 this weekend, I think. Not sure about next weekend. I really probably 2 next weekend, and then I think I'm away the last week of RTN season. I want to play Viscerai. I do want to play Viscerai one more time before it goes. Viscerai got me to a national championship. It's a hero that I've honestly loved since it came out. When I was playing in Arcane Rising, I had such a soft spot for it, even when it wasn't good. I was playing like Arknight Ascendancy pummel decks and like these mini kind of combo Arknight decks at the time with Sloggism and all sorts of randomness, strength potions. So I would like to get out there one last time with Viscerai. I don't think it's going to LL this weekend, so I might not play it this weekend. I might play it next weekend and try and... But maybe I play it this weekend, try and get a dub, Like, that's the thing. I want to get another mark on the Roll of Honor. But the other thing, I am seriously considering playing Dash, and I always have a Enigma in the back pocket. I would like to play something different. I actually really like the look of Jarl right now, and if I can get the cards, which I actually don't have because I haven't got the armory deck, then I might play Jarl one of these next 3 CC RTNs.
I would be a little worried of Viscerai potentially LLing this weekend. So I'd recommend you play that if you really have the itch to play that deck before it LLs, just in case. There's, I think, a much higher chance Viscerai LLs this weekend than Dash. So, you'll be able to play Dash again the week after, but maybe not Viscerai.
I hate mirror matches. That's the only reason I don't play Viscerai, is I really don't like this, particularly with this. I also don't love these current builds of Viscerai. I might end up playing more like the Galaxia... Sonata Galaxia, is what it's called, the more set-up-y kind of version, rather than the like low blue count aggro version like we've seen Brody play. I think I prefer like the Runaways kind of style of Viscerai, at least for my play patterns.
Yeah, or you can make your own one and just utilize the power of the unknown. Just be like, wait, this person's playing Sonata Phantasmia. Right, that's the one where they have to discard if the X is 6 or greater or something like that.
Is that a challenge?
Yeah.
Is that a challenge?
Now it is, yes.
Bring
out energy potions.
Mono combo.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. You only attack when you have 50 rune chance. And you have Reaping Blade, so they can't even heal higher than that.
I mean,
so, just get them.
Can I beat Syndra with that plan? I don't know, but maybe. All right.
Yeah, put your Calming Breezes in.
Yeah, well, maybe, exactly. All right. That'll do it for episode 200 of Arsenal Pass. Shout out to all the Arsenal Pass patrons. Look out for the additional content coming your way very soon on Arsenal Pass, including deck techs and something very special that Pankaj has lined up, plus more additional content to come all your way. Until next week, we will see you in the next episode.